All right, let's jump in here. So, wow, we have counting today. We have 5 lectures left. Not counting today, there's only 4. This is the last lecture of November, which is crazy. All right, and I realize that I have gone through 15 of like 52 slides in here. So, time to pick up the pace or something, if I'm even capable of that. I don't even know. All right, so we were talking last time, right? We introduced this topic of anti-fragility, and I remembered my pen today, so I can write not with my finger, which will be a big upside. Okay, so we kind of left off, we talked about 2 types of bias that height suggests are kind of built into human socialization. That's conformist and prestige bias. We noted a little bit about how social media sort of hacks each of them. And then we moved in here to talking about safetyism, right? And the way that, we've turned the world in a lot of ways into a much physically safer place for kids by making it kind of boring. And increasingly by moving them from kind of, real life to screen life, right? And also just making everything safer, but also a little bit more boring. Okay, so we left off just talking about how there's a difference between experiences that you have online versus in person, right? Online, there's no real risk, so there's limited room to grow. When you're in person, there's some more risk. Most of the downside, however, can be dealt with in real time, right? If you get into a fight with someone, people help you through that, or you work through it, or you throw a couple punches, right? And things get better. Social media is the one that Haidt really wants to draw a contrast with. And in particular, he suggests that social media errors can have much longer term downsides, right? Major downsides, especially with regards to social reputation. And I mean, there's been whole books and articles written about how girls use Instagram in junior high and high school to bully each other, right? Or to basically play, what amount to status games, right? Doing things like not tagging a girl who's clearly in a picture to show that she is out of the in-group. I saw smiles like that's actually happened. Or like, I did that, yeah. I left that bitch out of the tag on Instagram. And I'd do it again. Just the smiles of glee are a little distressing. Things like that, or actively removing tags. Someone who's removing a tag of someone in a photo, cropping them out of a picture that they're clearly in, right? There's a whole language of kind of bullying that happens, say, on Instagram. And so, little missteps can have major social implications, and it perpetuates through social media, right? A misstep in the real world or online can get amplified. Things that are said on social media can be saved for years later and used to kind of, pay it forward would be the wrong term because that's a positive thing. Ruin someone's life, I guess, is the more appropriate term. And at kind of the height of a lot of kind of cancel culture, right, there were examples of people digging up like a tweet that someone posted when they were in like the 7th grade where they said something, objectively not great, and then sending it to a college that person had been accepted to on a sports scholarship, and that college revoking it because of something that happened when they were like, in their early teens. Okay, so what Haidt suggests is that because physical risk on screens is minimal, right? Like if your kid's sitting in front of an iPad or playing a video game or staring at their phone all day, looking at things on Instagram, we tend to think that they are safe, right? And physically, they are. Because, nothing physically bad is happening to them at that moment. And so what we've done is we've treated that as a safe environment that requires no policing whatsoever. Oh, I'm sorry. I keep chuckling because my son, who's charming, um, he's a big player of Roblox, right? And until he discovered that, because there's some YouTuber, and I can't remember the name, forgive me, who posted this whole video about how he had been basically tracking down and exposing pedophiles that were using Roblox to contact children, and how this particular user got banned from Roblox for doing this, right? Roblox actually banned this user because, like, well, you're using our platform, incorrectly, right? It's not meant to, target criminals and, turn them into the police. But a lot of parents, I think, look at something like Roblox and think, this is a safe place for my kid, right? It's a bunch of kids' games, without probably ever digging deep enough into what is actually on Roblox, and there's some pretty horrifying stuff. But even, right, there's been really high-profile incidents of, and I don't know if you remember, at this point, some of the references get a little bit old, but there was an app a while ago called Club Penguin, right, for little kids, and weirdly, it was trying to build relationships with them, right? So we tend to think of it as safe, so we're like, yeah, it's fine, they're playing Club Penguin. What terrible thing could happen to them? I don't even know what Club Penguin was, to be honest. My kids missed that particular one. But what Height says is we're actually offering way too little guidance online and, way too much in person. Okay, so he suggests that the idea of safety has undergone a sort of concept creep, right? That it started with probably somewhat legitimate worries about, physical danger to children being left unattended, right? Actual cases where, young children had been kidnapped off the street and ostensibly met with terrible ends, or, disappeared for years until they were finally found and reunited with their families, right? So, people used to fear legitimate things like kidnappings, but increasingly today, many non-threatening things are seen as dangerous by, I guess, parents, right? To young people. And here, a couple of crazy stats. I think they're crazy anyway. According to Pew Research, American parents on average, right? So more than 50% of Americans' parents say that a child should be 10 before being allowed to play alone in the front yard, right? 12 before they can be left at home by themselves for 1 hour, and 14 before they can go alone to a public park. Now, I don't know what your childhoods were like. My childhood was definitely not this. By 8 years old, I was riding 20 minutes on my bike to a friend's house who was about 20 minutes away. I just had to phone my parents when I got there. There were no cell phones. I'm really old. I'm sorry. Actually not that old. It just suggests how fast technology's changed, right? I had to use their landline to phone my parents, right? I mean, maybe I'm a terrible parent by these standards. I think like the first time I left my kids alone at home, my daughter was maybe like 9 for like an hour. I'm like, I'm just gonna run to the store. I just gotta go get some groceries. Like, both of you watch TV, and it worked perfectly well. They just sat there in front of the television, and they were perfectly safe. And like the notion that someone should be 14 before they can go alone to a public park. I have pretty vivid memories of going, to public parks, like playgrounds near my house growing up when I was like 6. So maybe my parents were terrible parents. I don't know. I'll have to ask them. It was the 80s, the 80s were a charming time. Barely even used car seats at that point, so it's a miracle any of us survived. But right, 14 is pretty, like that's pretty crazy. That's a advanced age to go alone to a public park. That's pretty nuts. 10 before you can play alone in the front yard. And this is not a joke. There have been prominent cases where someone's kid was playing, like in the US more, where someone's kid was playing in the front yard and the kid's like 6, and a neighbor phones Child Protective Services and is like, there's an unsupervised child. They're like, Child Protective Services are like, are you supervising your child? They're like, yeah, I'm watching them out the front window, right? But people obviously reflect this kind of madness. Okay. Okay, I like it. Jonathan, I wish. If you would like to guest lecture and save my voice, that'd be great. When I say fear of getting punished for taking risks, I think so. Okay, and I think if we go back here, right, with this concept creep, people have increasingly sort of stepped back, and punished what would have been normal risk-taking behavior in the past more and more, right? And we've enveloped our kids, in kind of safetyism more and more. So yeah, I think, increasingly, like my favorite one is this, and I always remember this because I remember I think it was Leonard Sachs writing about this. It's the snowball fight, right, at school. How every school has banned snowball fights because inevitably there's this mystical belief that there might be an ice fragment and someone might lose an eye, and I've actually tried to look this up. I've never found any evidence of anyone being severely injured in a snowball fight. Like, there's no newspaper article like 12-year-old loses eye in random snowball fight. And I have been hit by my fair share of snowballs, and it stings a little bit, and it's annoying, but it's not fatal. And Leonard Sachs talks about this, the same way. It's like we've coddled kids so much. We're like, at school, all the snow must stay on the ground. This is an actual rule. My wife's a teacher. And she'll defend this rule, until the cows come home. And I still think it's dumb. It's like the snow stays on the ground. That's where it's supposed to go. And I'm like, okay. What Leonard Sachs is like, why don't you make at your school a snowball fight zone? And anyone who enters the zone is fair game to get hit by a snowball. And if you don't want to get hit by the freaking snowball, don't go in the snowball fight zone. And then anyone who wanders in and starts to cry about it like a little baby, I probably didn't need to add that part. It's like, well, you stepped into the snowball zone. And if you throw a snowball out of the snowball zone, then there's consequences. But yeah, like normal behavior, right? Things like having a snowball fight and potentially getting your, whacked in the face by a bunch of snow. We've I swear to God, in schools today, like throwing a snowball, you might as well bring a gun to school, right? Like, not really, I'm joking, of course, but the violations are seen as virtually the same. So we've really been like, oh my gosh, one time in Connecticut in 1482, Timmy Williams lost his eye in a snowball fight. And now no one can ever have a snowball fight again. There wasn't even schools in Connecticut in 1482. I picked a random date and I did a bad job of it. Maybe there were, I don't know. Anyway, so I'm sure it wasn't Timmy Williams at that point, though. I get what you're saying, and I think it's true, right? Like, parents and teachers have so seen every activity that kids engage in as so incredibly dangerous that, we've pared things back a lot. And I mean, I don't want to tell tales out of school here, because, some of this is probably for the best. But the level that we've, enhanced safety is pretty crazy. Like, if you go from the stories that my parents tell about stuff when they were growing up, my dad and his brothers, now they're from small town Alberta, but they used to walk down the main road of the town with 22s over their shoulders, right, to go hunting gophers in the fields. And I mean, can you imagine 3 kids walking around with 22s today? Like, the entire police force of the whole country would descend on those 3 children, right? Now, I'm not saying what my dad and his brothers did was great, probably not best not to have kids walking around with guns, but we definitely have a different standard of safety today. And yeah, we pathologize and freak out about very basic things. I think that media and the fear of scandals has played a part in this. Like, schools themselves may not care, but no one wants to be the example. Maybe, but I do think this, there's some very well-meaning people that really believe that you're going to lose your eye if you get hit by a snowball. And I could be wrong. If you want to send me evidence of snowball-related fatalities. I'm willing to listen to contrary evidence that would contradict my opinion. I've just never seen it, and I have tried. Not super hard, but I've maybe spent about half an hour, looking for this. I should pump it into ChatGPT and see if ChatGPT is like, yes, there have been 9,000 snowball-related deaths this year alone. Probably not. Anyway, I'm a terrible parent. I'm just like, Dad, we're gonna have a snowball fight. I'm like, yeah. Don't die. Is anyone bleeding severely? No, you're fine. Okay, but yes, I mean, I do think there's some. Nobody wants to be, the scandal, but even dumb stuff. Can I rant for one more second? I'm gonna rant for one more second. Because a few years ago, the city of Edmonton announced that they were going to be enforcing helmets on toboggan hills, right? That basically it was like, to go sledding down a hill, you should be wearing a helmet, and that you could be fined, for not doing so. Now, I've never seen a kid sledding to this day that is wearing a helmet, and I go sledding with my kids quite a bit because it's super fun. But there's definitely like a nanny state element that's like, but one kid in Toronto one time died while sledding, and it's like, okay. I guess if that was my kid, I'd feel pretty terrible, and I'd probably start like Fathers Against Helmetless Sledding or something. FASCIS? It's a terrible acronym. I need to work on it. So I don't want to mock that, but generally speaking, how many kids really injure themselves tobogganing? Probably not that many. But in Toronto, again, they were like closing ski hills permanently because it was like or toboggan hills because like it's so dangerous for children, right? So we've just got this nanny state kind of mentality that's like, we have to protect people from themselves. Dun dun dun. All right. Puberty. So, puberty and height stresses, and I think we all know this because we've all been there and sort of realized this. It is a time of intense physical change for humans. And what is pretty clear from kind of developmental biology, right? And you can look at all sorts of mammalian species, primates, and everything we know about humans as well, is that in adolescence, teenagers need experiences to help their brains develop useful behavioral patterns, right? And so, teenagers screwing up and making mistakes, is kind of part of life, and it's part of normal development. And he suggests that safetyism, right? No tobogganing for you, little Timmy. And smartphones block the experiences that teenagers need in particular ways. And he points to 4 foundational harms, which we'll go over in turn. Each of them sort of creates its own set of problems. So one of them, social deprivation. The other one, and you're all going to hate this one, sleep deprivation. Attention fragmentation. I mean, I think we all know this at this point. I barely need to go over it because every student I know that I've had a conversation with admits that they think that TikTok has ruined their attention span in some way. And addiction. We'll talk about that one. That one I think is particularly egregious, and I'm like more and more incensed about it, to be honest. Okay. Now, social media harms girls, according to Height, more. And we'll talk about boys too, because they have their own patterns of harm. But mental health for girls seems to be particularly affected. And we kind of saw that, like we've seen that the mental health effects since smartphones became the dominant medium of our society have definitely hit girls harder, right? All that mental health stuff that we looked at in the last unit. So yeah, video games, pornography affect them. And I think increasingly, I don't want to split it out because I do want to talk about it a little bit. Gambling. God, I hate sports betting so much. I can't even tell you. But video games increasingly also, I think, prime people for gambling, and boys especially for gambling in really, really insidious ways. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what social media platforms look like, or social media. Now, I increasingly hate the term social media because I don't think, I think initially social media was designed to help connect people, right? And I say here, it used to be about connecting people, but it transformed in 2010 and led to what Haidt calls the great rewiring, which he thinks, like the rewiring of our brains towards different things. And I increasingly, want to call it attention media because its purpose is no longer, to connect us, but actually just to hold your attention for as long as possible. Okay. And I mean, sometimes it uses us to do that, right? Because you're the one who generates the content. All right, but basically social media has kind of four main features. User profiles, right? So you have a profile, user-generated content, some form of social networking, and some kind of interactivity, right? People can make comments, people can upvote it, like it, dislike it, all of those things. Okay, so the first social harm, and again, you've seen this chart before, so you don't need to worry too much about it, but this is our time spent with friends graph. By age, starting in 2003, again, a happy and delightful time. The best time to be alive, possibly. That's when I was young. Down to 2019, right? So we see time with friends just tanking, through this period of the great rewiring, especially for the youngest cohort, right? Less dramatically for older folks. Okay, so what Haidt says, phones and social media, socials were pitched as connecting us, right? But, if we look at it, they've increasingly sort of disconnected people, taken people out of kind of physical community, meant that people spend less time with each other, more time, kind of communicating with each other in mediated spaces rather than in-person spaces, right? None of this, I think, is particularly controversial, right? Even when we're together, in some way, people are elsewhere. And it's always fun, especially my daughter, because she's just about 16, she'll get together with her friends and, you'll listen to them because, our house, the sound carries and you can hear everything, which is a great feature, but also kind of a bug. If you want to have a private conversation, it's outside to the hot tub. But one of the things that when she gets together with her friends, you'll hear them in the loft and it's like, giggle, giggle, giggle. Hey, look at this meme. Silence. Giggle, giggle, giggle. Hey, look at this meme. They're all on their phones, right? Looking up things, which they then occasionally show to each other, which is bizarre to me, but again, old. So even when they're together, they're apart, right? And I'm sure you have this experience of going out to restaurants or out with your friends, and suddenly you realize that 3 people are on their phone, right, doing something else for whatever reason, right? They got a text, they decided to check their email, or they're on social media, right? There's a profoundly disconnecting effect of these devices. I mean, I was just out with my friend Bryce the other day, and he's a big kahuna real estate developer and all of this stuff. And I spent half the meal watching him be on his phone answering some vital email that came in at 8 o'clock at night. He's an important guy. I also had emails from students, which I suppose are also important, but I was ignoring them because I just wanted to eat my lamb Rogan Josh. That's what I wanted to do. Okay, less time together, more time on screens, and far less embedded time together, right? Now, again, I think we could add to this, less time with trusted adults, right? Because you're in fewer spaces where there are chances to make connections with trusted adults, right? You're also going to have fewer trusted adults. And we've seen the kind of mental health, this is a blind spot, I think, for Haidt, but I think we've seen the mental health improving effect of more relationships with more trusted adults. Okay, I told you you're going to not like this one because I'm going to tell you something that you do that you shouldn't do, and you're going to keep doing it because whatever. You don't have to listen to me. I'm just, a professor. What do I know? Actually, not that much in reality. So, teens and emerging adults, right? Until you're something in the range of like your mid-20s, you would really benefit from getting about 9+ hours of sleep per night. This is especially true of younger teenagers, right? When you're going through those intense changes, that happen in puberty, your brain is undergoing just crazy processes, right? Myelination is going nuts. Your brain shape and size, all sorts of things are changing. It's being bathed in hormones, and all of this stuff that's transforming it into an adult brain, right? And that process is kind of exhausting, and you need a lot of sleep. On average, teenagers probably need almost as much sleep as babies do, and babies sleep a lot. Because those are the two periods at which your brain is changing the most, when you're a baby and when you're a teenager, right? All the way until you're about 23 to 25. 36 correlational studies found a strong connection between high social media use and poor sleep, and poor high social media use and poor mental health outcomes. Lots of heavy social media use is linked with poor sleep duration. And yeah, this 2020 study found that greater sleep disturbance and shorter total sleep time were associated with greater internalizing scores, right? So internalizing mental disorders like depression and externalizing scores like aggression. Okay, now Jean Twenge talked about this in her book iGen, right, back in 2017. Actually, let me point at my graph here and then I'll tell you about Jean, right? So what do we see? Teens who get less than 7 hours of sleep, right? So back in 1991, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and the Soviet Union still existed, I guess, for a few months, it was about 25% of boys, and let's say 32% of girls were getting less than 7 hours of sleep. Now that's less than 7, right? That's way less than 9 plus. By 2019, it's almost half of girls and 2/5 of boys getting less than 7 hours of sleep. So I think you could characterize them mostly as sleep deprived. And again, what do you see? A big jump during the Great Rewiring. So probably, Twenge talks about this in her book, iGen, which again, she wrote in 2017. And this is just, I guess, way back in the day, prior to smartphones being as prominent, Leonard Sachs was talking about this just with computers and social media in bedrooms as being a similar thing. These platforms, right, really, really disrupt sleep, and teenagers have a hard time putting them down. But one of the things that's generally true, and trust me, it's a battle, is that teenagers tend to keep their phones where? Under your pillow? How many is it at your bedside or under your pillow? Most of you. And I know when I ask this question, why? And it's well, it's my alarm clock. And I then ask if people have ever heard of an alarm clock. It's actually a thing. It costs $13 at Walmart. It's actually pretty cheap to get into. Not a high bar of entry. I could order probably one for everybody in this class for under $1,000 if I tried. I might have to get it from Temu, but I could do it. But you wouldn't use it anyway because you all love your phones, right? Having your phone next to your bedside offers a bunch of things. But particularly, it means that notifications are coming in a lot of the night for teenagers, right? So that you have, your social media apps kind of going ping, 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 and other teenagers, texting each other or posting things on social media, and notifications coming out all the time, right? Which is going to interrupt sleep, right? Heavy social media use, it's not like you use heavy social media for a bunch of hours in the day and then you go to bed and you wake up a lot. It's that social media is actually waking you up, right? Because you have your phone next to your bed and you're getting notifications all the time, right? Now I know you can put it in do not disturb, and the phone manufacturers have marginally attempted to make this better. When you plug your phone in, it goes into do not disturb or something like that. But mostly this has remained a problem, and it was a particularly big problem here. Okay. You are all Doug. We are all Doug. All of us are Doug from Up, right? You know the dog that gets distracted every 2 seconds when he thinks he hears a squirrel? We're all the dog from Up that thinks he hears a squirrel. Okay, and it's by design, right? One of the things that we should remember, Steve Jobs never let his kids use iPhones, right? He was actually vehemently against his own kids having an iPhone or an iPad because he understood what it was, right? And lots of other people that work in the tech industry are like, yeah, no, I would never give my kid a smartphone or an iPad or access to social media, and then they run social media platforms because all of these things are meant to keep your attention. You aren't making money for Facebook when you're not paying attention to Facebook, Instagram, or whatever other evil platforms. Does anyone use Threads? Has anyone ever used Threads? No, perfect. Stay like you are. The only true short message thing that you should use is Twitter, even though it's run by that Dr. Evil wannabe, Elon Musk, who, if he would like to give me $1 billion to say only nice things about him, I'd happily do so. Or, you know what, I'd settle for $1.5 million, frankly, and I'll be his spokesperson from then on. I'm easy. So, average number of notifications that a young person receives is, per day is nearly 200 or about 11 per hour. The heaviest social media users, like teen girls, are receiving as many as 1 notification per minute, right? And this is just attention fragmentation. The device is always calling you back, right? Because you make money for whatever platform you're signed into when you're paying attention to it. And people can't really multitask. Again, Turkle makes this book, or this pretty clear in her book, Reclaiming Conversation. There's been lots of studies as to whether people are actually capable of multitasking. You actually can't multitask, right? If you ever say, I'm a great multitasker, you're not. You're lying to yourself. What you're really good at is switching really, really quickly between tasks, right? And that's what people do. You switch really, really quickly between tasks. But what you're probably not aware of, because you would have no metric with which to measure this, is that with each task switch, your performance on the subsequent tasks gets worse. And they've done extensive testing on this. So they basically, they've done things like giving people an IQ test, right? And they give people an IQ test, basically in an undistracted environment, like a room where there's no distractions, versus one where they are getting notifications on their smartphones regularly. And the difference in terms of performance is somewhere between 10 and 15 points of IQ, right? In the distracted environment. So being distracted makes you somewhere between 10 and 15 IQ points dumber, right? You're not really dumber. You're just so distracted that you can't perform the tasks on the IQ test. So it looks like you score a lot lower, right? And there's increasing bodies of evidence that heavy smartphone use may worsen ADHD symptoms, right? And actually may manifest like ADHD symptoms in people who don't actually have ADHD. So, attention fragmentation. Wow, okay, 3:35. So, addiction. I'm going to sound like I'm doing psychology, but whatever. Smartphones give little bursts of dopamine, right, as rewards for certain actions, right? And basically the people who've designed these devices, they understand this, right? So this is what Haidt calls the hooked model from Narial's book, Hooked, how to create habit-forming products, right? And basically, it's well understood, right, what gets people coming back to particular platforms. Okay, so starts with a trigger, notifications. Why does every stupid app you download ask you if it can send you notifications? Because that's the way they're going to pull you in over and over again, right? That's the way it's going to get you to pay attention to it, right? So you're going to get a notification, right? You're going to hear your phone go, well, bing, or whatever sound you chose, or buzz, or whatever it happens to be, which triggers an action, right? You open the notification, you see that influencer that you like has posted a new video, or something new has shown up on Instagram, you know, and it leads to a pleasurable event sometimes. And the sometimes here is super important, right? Because most apps are built on a variable reward schedule. So, I mean, if you've taken a psychology class, you probably understand what a variable reward schedule is. But if not, one of the things that's generally true, right, is if you reward a behavior every single time, eventually you sort of burn out the pleasurable effect of it, right? So, you know, like if you, let's say, very ridiculous example. If you went to the casino and you were playing the slots, and every single time you spin the slots, you won $1, right? You would actually get bored of that pretty quickly, right? Because it's just like, yay, I won, yay, I won, yay, I won. Okay, this is boring, there's no challenge, there's no fun, there's no reward. However, if you only win 1 out of 17 times, right? Or at a kind of more often at a random interval, right? Your kind of dopamine reward from that actually builds every time you lose, right? That's why slot machines are so addictive. Because every time you, I've never played a slot machine. It used to be like a handle that you pulled. I think it's just a button now. And God willing, I'll never play a slot machine because I've never seen it as anything other than completely idiotic. But okay. I've known people who played slots, and I've known some problem gamblers, and so I can recognize it, right? If you lose 10 times and then win, that dopamine reward is actually building up. And so when you finally do win on that 10th spin or that 40th spin or whatever number, because it's generally random, it actually feels a lot better than if you just won every single time. So it actually makes it harder to quit. So things like TikTok, things like Instagram, things like Facebook are all built around variable reward schedules, right? TikTok knows you, right? It probably knows you better than your mother. It doesn't want to give you a highly rewarding video every single time because you will actually get bored of that. So it's going to feed you a random number of okay videos that you're like, that's so-so, that's not great. And then suddenly give you one that it knows you really, really like to feed that variable reward. Now, I had not actually realized this until I started playing games with my son. And I play a game occasionally, you may have heard of it. It's called Rocket League, right? And it's really dumb. It's car soccer. Now, my son can fly through the air like he's flying a fighter jet and knock the ball in off the ceiling, and I just drive around, and I'm bad at it, but whatever, it's fun to play with them. One of the things that's weird is that Rocket League actually has a bunch of variable rewards built into it as well, right? And so you think of it, I don't know if you know it, right? Occasionally you'll get these like hexagonal orbs that you can trade in for some kind of reward. And most of the time, like you'll click on it and you'll choose what level of reward you want, and it'll flash, and then the reward rises up. And inevitably, like a whole bunch of the time, it's really crappy. It's like, oh, you got a skin for that car you don't like, or another set of wheels, or something dumb, right? A banner. But every now and then, it actually gives you something great, like, oh my gosh, I got a new car thing, skin. I don't know what they're called. Whatever, I don't even care. I drive the basic Octane. That's all I'm going to do, no matter how much my son wants me to spend $17 on some other car. It's actually a variable reward, right? And it builds in a sort of gambling behavior into kids' apps, right? And you see this all over the place. It's in Fortnite, right? Fortnite gives you variable rewards. The reason they update the store every single day in Fortnite and other games is so you keep checking back until you find something that's like, wow, that is the greatest skin ever, right? Or whatever, I don't even care. Fortnite's dumb. A lot of technology companies understand this really well, and they target this even at kids and teenagers, right? All those social media apps have variable reward schedules. You keep scrolling, right, to find that thing. Okay. So the fourth one is investment, right? Most of these platforms get you invested into them, usually by creating a profile, right? So you create your profile on Instagram, your profile on Facebook, or TikTok, right? You start following people, you have a kind of identity, and that creates a sort of investment, right? You want to keep coming back. You want to talk about something like Rocket League or Fortnite, right? They do this through customization, right? So that ultimately, it's hard to quit the game because you've now spent $100 on skins, and now you just feel plain silly, right? I did buy one skin in Fortnite. It's the giant duck, Sergeant Drake. He makes me laugh when I play Fortnite with my son because playing as a 6-foot duck is just hilariously amusing. And when he does the dances, it looks ridiculous. So I like it. I'm not invested in it. I can quit anytime I want. And I have, mostly. Right, investment, right? It kind of locks you in. So creating your profile. Okay, now what does all of this do, right? It locks you into a kind of dopamine cycle. And what happens, like a lot of things, your brain adapts to dopamine by down-regulating it, right? So you actually naturally have less. So you need increasing amounts of dopamine to feel the same reward, right? This is the same thing that happens for drug addicts, right? Is you tend to need bigger and bigger hits to get to kind of baseline again, right? Just to feel okay. So, porn does the same thing, right? We have lots of evidence that, pornography keeps having to push the envelope of kind of how extreme it is because people get bored, and the same thing they've watched 100 times doesn't excite them anymore. So, in order to get people coming back to platforms like Pornhub, you need more and more extreme content that's going to give you a bigger burst of dopamine, right? So yeah, the brain can enter a deficit state. And what happens, and sort of the theory is, your ordinary life becomes boring compared to the constant stimulation you can get from a screen, right? From Instagram, from TikTok, right? TikTok becomes more exciting than real life. Okay, so the conclusion for this part. When you put those foundational harms together, they tend to explain why mental health got so much worse when we went through this, this phase that Haidt calls the Great Rewiring, right? We basically reduced social contact, right? Largely. And this started, again, well before COVID. COVID just made it worse. We introduced a device that tends to disrupt sleep and make sleep worse. So that has natural effects on these internalizing disorders, right? If you're sleep deprived, you're more likely to be depressed or angry or both, right? Oh, I can't get my 15-year-old daughter to go to bed, and she is at times depressed and angry, mostly with me for some reason, especially when I have to wake her up. What was the third one? Oh, attention fragmentation, right? Our attention is more fragmented. And we've built this kind of reward cycle, this addiction cycle, to make it really hard to quit these platforms, which just creates a kind of reinforcing cycle. Okay. Is there a status that teens attach to having lots of notifications? Like they have lots of friends and important things? That's a really interesting question. And the honest truth is, I don't know. Wait, you're closer to being teenagers than I am, by a fair measure. Is there a social status attached to being like having your phone blow up all the time? There is. There was when you were in high school. Like it made you like a more important person. Like okay. Okay. Or they were just commenting on your photos or something like that on Instagram. What's that? Okay. Okay. Like I said, I was a teenager in the late 90s, so I'm like, I don't know. Okay. That makes sense. When I was younger, I would generally get kind of sad when I got back from somewhere without Wi-Fi and my phone wasn't set. That's true. You know, I totally I feel that, right? It's like no one even cared that I wasn't here. Boo. Your moment. Okay. You love the Sergeant Drake skin. My son says it's cringy, but I will die on the hill that Sergeant Drake is amazing. Because it looks super dumb. I don't know why. Followers' view are like social currency. Yeah, I mean, of course it is, right? There's a reason we treat influencers like kings now, right? And that everybody wants, every stupid YouTube video, like, follow, and subscribe, right? Because it is the social currency. Okay, cool. This girl looks very sad. Okay, let's talk about it. Maybe we have like 3 minutes. I can't waste any time. Harms. So, for girls, and again, we've seen this graph before. I've repurposed this graph now. But there's a larger and more consistent relationship between time spent on social media and the likelihood of depression, right? So we see they're roughly 3 times as likely to report poor mental health effects. And this has been confirmed by a bunch of randomized control studies that have found a correlation between reduced social media use and improved mental health, right? And this is going back quite a ways now. We have probably a good 20 years of data on this, but they've done these interesting, I remember this Dutch study where basically they took a group of people and they had their control group and it was like, continue using your social media as normal. And then they took their experimental group and they were like, for the next 3 weeks, stop using social media. And what happened is the group that stopped using social media reported positive mental health changes, right? They were happier, they felt less anxiety, all sorts of things, right? So that's a randomized control study, and we've seen a few. And Haidt, Twenge, and Zach Rausch have collected about a dozen studies that all point in this direction, right? And what early studies, when Facebook was being introduced to college campuses in the early 2000s, showed that when Facebook arrived on campuses, mental health declined, right? Anxiety and depression went up. It is all the lizard man's fault. Okay, I will never stop calling him the lizard man. I don't know why. Girls use social media more than boys, right? So, especially visually oriented platforms, things like Instagram in particular, TikTok, Snapchat, right? They're basically targeted principally at girls. Boys do use them, but they understand that their audience is principally girls, right? And you see this, right? Super social media users, 40 hours per week or more, 40 hours or more per week, right? So you have a full-time job of using social media. Isn't that fun? Right? Way fewer boys than girls in that category. Okay, so when we talk about the worst platforms for poor mental health, there are things like Snapchat and Instagram. I'm going to make a note for myself here because I'm going to stop there because I'm out of time. But Facebook knew, I'm going to write this and I'm not going to delete my notes. Facebook knew this and covered it up. And I'll start with that on Monday. It's Friday, right? Okay. Happy weekend. Get home safe. And we'll see you on Monday as we enter the last 4 lectures of the course. Da-da-da-da. Alrighty. Yes. Hello. Yes. No worries. I just wanted to check in because I had heard from you and then I didn't hear from you.
Yes.
And I know it's probably like coming back from Mars.
Yeah. They ended up. Instead of 11
Oh, that's so lovely. Sent you back into the spiral.
Yeah, it kind of sent me backwards.